It's Dr. Bhairavi, the Sky Priestess. So today I wanted to share with all of you something that's been on my mind, and for a change I'm doing this live on Instagram as opposed to YouTube. But today I'm going to be talking about how to actually make change in the world. So here's the thing. We see so many things happening around us, and if we get emotionally invested into everything, things can seem rather overwhelming. And that's when people get depressed, people start questioning things, they have a more tenuous relationship with their faith, and you kind of slide into that hole of what's the point of anything at all. So, in response to these very legitimate questions, I've been thinking about a few themes that could help those who are navigating these challenges better understand how to actually create sustainable change in this very, very complex world that we are in. So point number one, there was a study, I think it was done in 2019 if I'm not mistaken, and it was by political scientists in Harvard. In fact, it's probably the most useful piece of research from political science that I have read in the past few decades. And in it, the paper and they made it into a book. They talked about the power of nonviolent resistance, but the conditions that could actually make change happen at a grand scale. And I know this is technical, but it's okay. I know all of you can understand it as well if you really want to. So they found that it takes 3.5% at minimum of the population to continuously engage in some form of nonviolent protest, whether that's chants, whether that's slogans, whether that's art installations that disrupt the status quo. They found that it just takes 3.5% of people to keep at it for a year. And effectively what happens at that point is that they succeed or they don't. Not every case succeeded through these means, but they found that 3.5% threshold to be extremely important. And as those of us who have a conscience, who have a heartbeat, who are trying to do good things in the world, especially when it comes to Palestine, there's so many people who are disheartened because we look at so many millions and numbers of people who show up, and we ask ourselves, why is change not happening? But in truth, that number has yet to be reached, especially in the countries that have the most direct impact upon the situation. So according to those studies, it will take at least 12 million people in the United States alone to continuously, over the course of a year, it could happen sooner, but they say usually it takes about a year, to effect some kind of change in policy. Now, I don't know if Palestine has that kind of time frame, but at the very least, if you look at the upcoming American elections coming up, we can take this information and we can see just what it takes to organize and to show up en masse. Because this is how change is made. It takes a lot of us. And I know 1 million sounds like a lot of people, but you got to understand we are a planet of, is it 8 billion now? And so 3.5% is actually quite a large amount if you think about it from our day-to-day human perspectives. So that's point number one. And if you think about that number, 12 million in the US alone, how are you going to get that? What I find very encouraging is how people are actually affecting change in their local councils. They are not to say legislator, but town councils and town meetings, and they're working on those smaller bodies because that is also where you see focal points of changes. So this is extremely good. Whoever is doing this grassroots activism knows what they are doing, but we need to increase the numbers. And this isn't just about Palestine, it's about any real cause that is actually worth fighting for. Consciousness, awareness, and evolution when it comes to making political and social change is not enough. You need numbers and you need consistency. And that's point number one. Point number two, when we talk about not seeing the effects of what we are working towards or fighting for, or the world that we want to see, and it tends to be very disheartening when you've already tried so hard and you can't really see anything happening on the surface. But I was watching someone else talk about this, and I'll see if I can dig up both of the references and put them in the comments below once I'm done with the video. I was seeing someone talk about this, and they said, well, it would benefit everyone to think of the work of social justice activism, and I would say spiritually focused social justice and activism. It would help for people to take wisdom from the mushroom. So when you look at a mushroom, you think that that's what it is on the surface, and you pluck it and eat it or go do whatever you want to do with it. Just be careful, obviously. But the mushroom is just an outpouring. It is a growth on one part of a much larger organic network called the mycelial network. And so even if we don't see mushrooms all over the place, that network is what actually allows and sustains that one mushroom to come up. So even when we are in situations where we've tried, we've pushed, we've applied pressure, and we think that our efforts don't matter, they actually do. That mushroom or that outpouring may not exactly be where you want it to be, but it continues to add. It continues to go on. And again, there is that magic minimum threshold of 3.5%. So when you put two and two together, as per what is observed in nature and what is also observed through careful political analysis, we see that a relatively small group of people in terms of percentages working together may not get all of the effects they want all at once. But with some direction and some focus, they can see a net positive happening. And there are enough causes in the world and enough people who care that this magical 3.5% threshold will eventually be met. But here's the thing. Here's point number 3. What it's going to take, and what has basically become my keyword in my own path, and what it is that I do, is that not only do we need numbers, not only do we need sustained engagement, not only do we need the faith and realization that what we do somewhere has ripples somewhere completely different. The third point is, to do this, one must have faith. And sometimes faith is hard to find, which is why I'm using the language of biology and the language of political analysis, because sometimes finding that space of faith is hard for people who look at surface reality and say, this is all there is, and it's depressing. But it isn't real. What we have to see and what we have to understand is the language of spirit has always said faith is the key to begin with. And faith is not, in this context, it's not just about hoping things will get better. It is about aligning yourself with spirit in a way in which you are, where it is possible, where it is sustainable for you to do so, to actually show up where you are needed. Now, we can't spread ourselves too thin. There are many causes, and as I said, there's many people. Everyone has a certain thing to do. But knowing what you know now, and some of you may already have known this from your own life experiences, but this is more of a general point for people who needed a little bit more intellectual analysis on it. But knowing what you know, when you show up with faith, when you show up with conviction, that is where you get the will to sustain that length, that duration, that period of time that is actually needed for change. So numbers, sustained engagement, the realization of the power of a network, and faith. Because faith is what gives you the will to continue, the will to actually move. Now, I notice people have been coming and going, and there's actually very few people watching this right now because this is not a popular subject. Some people want to come for the astrology, and as I always say, you want more astrology, you can go get a session or join Tier 23. But this work, my platform, is entirely about that intersection of spirituality, politics, activism, compassion, and embodiment. This is what I have come here to teach. So when we look at what is needed to make a change in the world, when we have these facts that are reinforced by words of spirit from so many different traditions, and as I said in this year's overview, even if your faith is the size of a mustard seed, it can move a mountain, but you can't do it alone. So reach out to people who care about things the way you care about them. Go in groups, find community, find networks, and you can, as of course, stand in sympathy with each other, you can stand in solidarity with each other and those whose voices have not been heard, but that is the way change can happen, and change will happen. So keep it up. Don't give in to the gloom and doom, because that's exactly what the status quo wants you to believe. So having said that, just a quick tidbit. I hope that helps. And I send all of you lots of love, very many blessings. And hopefully this information gives you a little bit of a nudge, especially if you're feeling a bit, gloomy or pessimistic about the world in general. Ciao, ciao for now. Bye-bye.